Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism, pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community, and in these times, more than ever, pro-America. Joining us tonight from around the country are good friends Sara Carter, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, and Tammy Bruce. All right, there they are, and here we go. This week felt to me like a turning point in the war against the virus. Of course, the death toll continues to mount, families across the country ripped apart. But the data is clear. Things are getting better. Meanwhile, the shutdown toll is getting worse. This week, unimaginable numbers out of work, with all the pain and suffering that goes with it. President Trump understands that. All along, he's had the right instincts. At first, he tried to block the virus coming here with travel restrictions. When it did get here, in low numbers, he tried to contain it. Everyone forgets this. The media scream, "What did you do in February?" He did what you're supposed to do. It's called containment. Track and follow every case. Only when there was a breakout did he move to the stage of mitigation and shutdowns. When he saw the testing system was broken, he ordered a completely new one, private sector-led. When he saw problems with equipment, he ordered a business-led emergency response. Project Airbridge for PPE, the dynamic ventilator reserve. Our health system was stretched, but it didn't break. It was nothing like Italy. In fact, now we're in a position to help Italy or places with even fewer resources like Africa. And the president leads the legacy of a much stronger system for the future. This was a total vindication of the entrepreneurial, data-driven approach he and his team brought to this crisis. This week, in response to the failures of the World Health Organization, he rejected globalist groupthink and brought some long overdue accountability. And now, because we have flattened the curve, because we have slowed the spread, with those important new guidelines, he wants to reopen America ASAP, as soon as safely possible. That is our focus tonight. Last Sunday, we told you about a Stanford University study that would revolutionize our understanding of this pandemic. The scientists we had on tested over 3,000 people in Santa Clara County for antibodies to try to gauge the true infection rate. The results were released on Friday. Between 48,000 and 81,000 people were infected in Santa Clara County by early April, 50 to 85 times more than the official number of cases. Those famous models Dr. Fauci talked about were wrong, based on bad data. The coronavirus infection rate is much higher, but that means the fatality rate is much lower. Not 3% or even 1% as we were told, but likely between 0.12 and 0.2%. What does that mean? First, as we said last week, protect the vulnerable. They really are at great risk. So the White House guidelines are absolutely right to emphasize that. But it also means that this virus is out there on a much bigger scale than we knew. That has to affect our plans to reopen. The big thing we've been hearing is you can't reopen unless you can do widespread testing, isolate everyone with coronavirus and trace their contacts. This was Dr. Fauci's mantra.
Identify individual cases, isolate them, and contact tracing. Identification, isolation, contact tracing. Identify, isolate, and contact trace.
Now we know how widespread the virus is from the survey testing. It's likely that millions of Americans have it. Millions more will get it. You can't quarantine and contact trace them all. So it was a major victory for science and common sense that this was cut from the new White House guidelines. They do not recommend testing everyone, only those who already have symptoms or people with no symptoms in vulnerable populations like nursing homes. But as the president has said, it's state and local leaders who decide how and when to open up. And the problem is a disastrous establishment groupthink has emerged around the extreme version of Dr. Fauci's plan.
I think widespread testing and contact tracing is going to be absolutely essential to finding out exactly where we are in this fight against this deadly virus.
The variables will include the capacity of the healthcare system to identify, isolate, and treat those infected so they can slow the spread.
We can't open the country back up until we can do testing on a massive scale. Why aren't we even close?
It will be impossible, health experts believe, to fully reopen the country short of a vaccine, which still seems a year or so away, unless there's widespread testing.
Just in the last few days, the establishment put up a new roadblock to reopening, tripling the number of tests to, quote, identify the majority of people who are infected and isolate them from people who are healthy. This establishment groupthink is misinformation. It ignores the latest data. No surprise that big business has bought into it too. Jeff Bezos told Amazon shareholders this week that those who test positive could be quarantined and cared for. Everyone who tests negative could re-enter the economy with confidence. What an idiotic statement. We've got enough problems without Jeff Bezos casually throwing out ignorant, unscientific mumbo-jumbo. But this is how some state and local leaders are talking too. Gavin Newsom this week said that California will need the widespread ability to test, contact trace and isolate before relaxing its stay-at-home order. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti said the same thing. These people and their public health officials talk to Dr. Fauci. Now, I'd like to talk to Dr. Fauci. His advice is hugely consequential. Unfortunately, although we've been asking for a while, he won't talk to us. So tonight, I'm just going to ask the questions anyway and see if we get a reply. 1. Dr. Fauci, you keep telling us you're led by the science and the data. Why was your data so wrong for so long? Why didn't you commission survey testing like the Stanford team have just carried out to get an accurate picture of the spread and fatality of this virus? Will you carry out nationwide survey testing immediately? 2. Based on this new data, do you now accept that it's unnecessary and impractical to identify, isolate and contact trace everyone who has this virus? 3. Will you tell the governors, the media, the big business bosses like Bezos that widespread virus testing of individuals is not necessary for reopening? Will you rule out immunity certificates immediately? 4. Do you agree that all deaths matter, not just coronavirus deaths? Will you commit to a study of the long-term public health costs of the shutdown to help inform any future pandemic response and factors like disrupted medical treatment, suicides, rise in opioid and other addictions, and lower life expectancy caused by shutdown-induced poverty? Now, the contours of the political battle over all this became clearer this week. President Trump now owns reopening, but with Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont looking at the end of May, de Blasio saying July, Gavin Newsom saying next year, Democrats own the shutdown, along with their allies in establishment media, the voice of the 37% work-from-home elite. By setting up the small business rescue plan and pushing for infrastructure, payroll tax cuts and bringing manufacturing home, Trump owns the rebuilding. But with Pelosi and Schumer blocking emergency help, the Democrats now own the small business collapse and job losses. The White House reopening guidelines were mercifully free of the worst excesses of the Fauci doctrine, free of stupid, over-restrictive mandates. But even there's still room for improvement. You can't really reopen the economy until you reopen schools, for example. And we still face a grave danger of government corona overreach. That is the immediate political battle. The threat of this overreach is everywhere, even among conservatives who should know better. Texas Governor Greg Abbott put this man, Mark McClellan, on his reopen task force. He's a co-author, along with Scott Gottlieb, of a reopening plan that is a monstrous technocratic nightmare. And look at this beauty from former Romney advisors Lani Chen and Avik Roy. This is a real quote. Those wishing to engage in air and Amtrak travel should be required to participate in a certified contact tracing app and demonstrate at check-in that they have tested negative. Insane. Do not let them expand the bossy, petty, busybody, bureaucratic state on the back of this crisis. We now know, finally, thanks to the Stanford research, just how widespread this virus is. We can't hide from it. We must learn to live with it. Until we get a vaccine, a cure, of course, protect the vulnerable. But most people who get it don't even know they've had it. All these complicated technocratic schemes for reopening and endless testing are a trap. We were supposed to be flattening the curve, not eliminating it, slowing the spread, not stopping it. We've done those things. It was an incredible achievement. Now, let's get back to work. If you agree with this message, please follow us at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC and share it far and wide so everyone else can hear it too. All right, let's bring in our guest for the night, Fox News contributor and host of the Sara Carter Show podcast. Very exciting, Sara's podcast. You've got to go for it. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz and Fox News contributor and president of Independent Women's Voice, Tammy Bruce. All right, great to see you all. Matt Gaetz, you're on one of the president's groups looking at reopening. Where do you think things stand right now, both at the national level and at the state level, in terms of reopening and moving on from the immediate crisis stage that we've been living through the last few weeks?
The president is chomping at the bit to unleash the opportunity in the American economy yet again once we can do so safely. But Steve, there is a globalist element to the establishment elite thinking that you described in your monologue. I recall the WHO telling us that the death rate could be as high as 3.4%. And yet the Santa Clara experience you cite shows that the WHO could have been off by a factor of 17 to 28. Americans can take great pride in the fact that President Trump isn't going to overpay for bad science from people who shill for China when it is convenient for them to do so. I think that brings the decision-making to the president, and I think that, Eisenhower warned in his farewell address that we could end up ceding too much decision-making to a technological elite, and that real leaders had to ask tough questions and balance these considerations that you've reflected on.
Great. No, such a great point about the WHO. And you still hear people today, citing WHO advice in terms of how we should reopen. It's absolutely unbelievable. Tammy, one of the things that's very interesting about this Stanford research, the group behind it, we had them on last week. Part of that team, not on the medical side, but kind of helping them with resources and so on, is David Neeleman, who's the founder of JetBlue. And he's, just as Matt Gaetz just said, chomping at the bit to get things moving again, because he's highly conscious both of the jobs impact of this with his companies, but also his parents who are at risk. And he's got a plan to bring this virus, not the virus testing, but the antibody surveys, so you could get a snapshot of how widespread the virus is in different communities as a way to inform local decision makers. They say they can see that it's already out there, and that would make them more confident and also make people more confident about opening up. It's amazing to me that you've got this sort of slightly renegade group of doctors and entrepreneurs pushing this forward, and that the system itself isn't demanding that kind of testing so we get an accurate picture of this virus everywhere.
Well, obviously, after the Santa Clara result, what I would have expected, and it seems to be coming true, is that the machine doesn't want that to continue, because it does exactly what you've outlined there, is that it takes fear away. And when there's less fear, government has less power. We're less inclined as individuals to cede power to the government because of an unknown, monster that's out there. As long as we don't know, really, that is the problem. So clearly we must do that. I understand it's not the president's goal to test everyone, literally. But when we can have groups, random groups, over thousands of people, is what Stanford looked at over there in Santa Clara, finding that, in fact, this is widespread. Now, that doesn't mean that it's harmless. We still have a lot of unknowns.
Yes.
We don't know long-term impact. We don't know, like with chickenpox, which leaves itself in your system to appear decades later as shingles. There's a lot we don't know. But right now, what California relies on, as an example, and what the system relies on, is being able to tell people, you've got to stay hidden because this is still a monster. As we learn more, power is information. Information is power. You've got, they rely on ignorance. The more information we have, the better, of course. And then we'll at least find out the degree to which this is spread, especially for individuals and business owners, to understand that this is something that is similar to what we've seen. We must do more research. And when we do that, we'll be able to move on even further, allowing the president, as an example, when you say in your monologue that he's preparing us and he's going to leave us better prepared, this entire system must be better prepared for what something like China does and for the impact of viruses like this on our lives.
That's so well put. I totally agree. Sara, there's something that Tammy mentioned in the show I'd like to get you to react to, which is this attack that comes against all of us who kind of emphasize the need to get things moving in the economy, to stop those job losses, to stop the human suffering and health problems that come from the shutdown. We're just accused of not caring about lives and putting the economy and Wall Street ahead of people. It's exactly the opposite. You can balance. It's quite possible to say, as we've been saying all along, of course we recognize this is a really dangerous illness if it gets the people who are most vulnerable, especially the elderly and those with underlying conditions, as we've said, ad infinitum. We've got to protect those. But because it's true from the data, we now see that over 80% or whatever it is have mild or zero symptoms. It's just not necessary to have this sort of total lockdown forever. And it seems to me that the media and the establishment, they're actually invested in the shutdown. They kind of like it. They want it to keep going.
Well, because Tammy was 100% right about the fear. Utilizing fear, then people secede their liberties to the government because they're so afraid. But the random sampling, to understand this pathogen, and doctors have said this over and over again, experts have said this, the Stanford study is an example of that in Santa Clara. To understand this pathogen, you don't need to test everybody, you just need random sampling throughout the country to truly understand this. We may have already developed a certain herd immunity to this virus anyways, to the Wuhan virus, and we may have developed that. And Tammy's right, we don't know everything about this virus because, of course, it emanated from China. The Chinese Communist Party has been totally untruthful and have hidden so many factors about this virus from the world, not just from the United States of America. So we do have to understand that. But we may have developed a herd immunity already in some sense to this virus. Now, that's not to say that we can't protect those that are most vulnerable. We have to. But Steve, we have 1.5 million people in the healthcare industry that are going to be losing their jobs, according to Oxford Economics. Yeah. We have people that can't get to a hospital to check on, they may have cancer, who knows? They can't go in for regular checkups. We've seen hospitals across the country that could be filing for bankruptcy, and Boston Medical is furloughing 10% of its staff. So there's a lot of other people that are going to be affected by this, particularly when we're thinking of health and the health of our nation, and both the economic aspects that go along with that.
Just such great points, Sarah. I just want to kind of wrap this up by underlining a couple of things there. One, on the health care system and the disruption there and the cost of that, I noticed that in the UK, a really senior cancer doctor just this week said that in his view already, because of the disruption to treatment in the UK, over a 5-year period, more people will die from the disruption in the UK just to cancer treatment than because of the coronavirus. And secondly, to your point about herd immunity, it's interesting. That phrase kind of frightens a lot of people because the UK government and Sweden and so on used it at the beginning, and it put a lot of people off. But I was very interested to see that Gavin Newsom used the term herd immunity over and over again in his remarks this week. He's just got a timeline that's much further out than what you were suggesting, Sarah. But the key question is we need to know. That's why we need better data. That's why this Stanford study is so important. All right, thank you all. Coming up, Nancy Pelosi gave some interviews this week from her ivory tower. They were truly revolting. We will bring you the worst of it after the break. Don't go in. Welcome back. It's bad enough that Nancy Pelosi is playing politics as hundreds of thousands of businesses lie on the verge of bankruptcy and tens of millions of people have filed for unemployment. But instead of taking responsibility for her inaction, disgracefully, she's literally accusing the president of killing people. Here she was this morning.
His earlier delay and denial caused deaths.
Tammy, it's incredible to me. I mean, a few weeks ago she did this, but in a kind of less direct way, where she said that his actions had resulted, you know, in killing people. And now she's got a lot of blowback for that. And now she's doubled down on it. It's totally shameless.
It is. And let's remember, as the president was making his decisions in late January and early February, what was she doing? She was impeaching the president. They are really hoping that people somehow forget about that. But even during that time, the American people didn't like it, and his approval rating went up. They didn't like what they were seeing. So this is a remarkable turn of events where look, this is an existential issue. Already has been costing the lives of tens of thousands of Americans, will cost more lives, and all they can think about is how to smear the man who made the difference for us because of the November election. That is all they can think about. Now, this brings to mind for the American people to think about. And we see this across the board with media, with politicians, with other people we've known, with the behavior of people. It's funny what you learn about people when there's a crisis and how they respond. Some people would argue that, you know, this is partisanship, how you view the Democrats, and this is not fair. Even Democrats at this point, when you look at the approval ratings of the president when it comes to how he's handled the virus, indicate that they understand what he's done and they approve of it. This is desperation, but it also reveals that there is nothing being taken seriously about the seriousness of what they could actually do to make people's lives better. And I'll just make one more point. Yes, individuals have filed for unemployment and businesses might go bankrupt, and we look at the detail of that. But in the middle of that remains the psychological impact on people who don't know what tomorrow brings. This is unacceptable for the greatest country on earth. And that is what the Democrats have created. They've created an environment where the average person still really does not know if the company, the big company they work for, would survive. Neiman Marcus is expected to file for bankruptcy next week. You know, these are remarkable times in the emotional impact for how people view their own lives and what the future holds. And shame on her. They have no shame, and they clearly don't care about the individual in this country at any point.
That's right. I mean, that's really strongly put, and I totally agree. And I would, you know, if we weren't on TV, I'd speak even more strong terms, because every time I see her, I just get so angry with her attitude, just like politicizing this to an unbelievable degree. Matt, I mean, you know, she's saying all this about the president, and at the same time, for political reasons, she's blocking the money. She's been doing it for over a week now, blocking the lifeline money for small businesses. And they go on about how they're the party of working people. I mean, if she says the president is killing people, then are we entitled to say the same applies to all the consequences or lack of action?
Nancy Pelosi is the hypocrite of the House. While Donald Trump was shutting down travel from China, Nancy Pelosi was volunteering as a tour guide in Chinatown, and she said she did so that there wouldn't be racist attacks, and really that's just the Democrats resorting to identity politics. But it is in fact Nancy Pelosi who is directly responsible for the death of businesses. It's really rich for her to talk about any delays by the president when her delays in reauthorizing the Paycheck Protection Bill will result in the death of businesses that will never come back. Those families are forever changed because of Nancy Pelosi's irresponsible conduct. But not all Democrats are behaving this despicably. Got to give a shout out to Democrat Jimmy Panetta, Democrat Tom Suozzi. They are on the president's task force with me. They give constructive, meaningful comments. The president hears from them directly. So we need more Democrats that are willing to work with this president like Panetta and Suozzi, and a lot less like the leadership that just want to score political points.
Totally agree. And by the way, the president has that attitude, just like you, of a bipartisan spirit. He's constantly praising the Democrat governors he's working with, you know, just this afternoon, Andrew Cuomo and so on. But she just can't get that. Sarah, the other thing that just made me sick this week, like while she's grinding the noses and the faces of small business into the dust with her delays, she's there parading in her mansion with a sort of giant fridge and her hoarding ice cream and going on about yucking it up with James Corden. I mean, this woman is, I don't know what to say about this. I think we got the pictures now. There she was with her fridge. My goodness.
She's so disconnected from the American people. I mean, she doesn't even see it herself, Steve. She's so disconnected. There are 22 million, roughly 22 million people have filed for unemployment. We haven't even really seen this since the Great Depression. 17.7% were expected with unemployment this month. That's up from 4.4% last month. And she does this social media type of advertisement with her $1,000 fridge and all of her ice cream, Jenny ice cream inside. She's just very disconnected. But I want to say one thing. She should put the blame directly on the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. President Trump is not to blame for this virus that came out of Wuhan, China. They lied to the world. So if Nancy Pelosi wants to do the right thing for the American people as House Speaker, she should stop playing politics and she should put the blame where it needs to reside. And that is on the Chinese Communist Party that not only wounded and hurt their own people, but the rest of the world. And if we stay together and focused on that, we can make real effective changes, but we can't when the Democrats keep playing these political games.
Totally right. And that's going to be a big issue in November. Of course, she and the other members of the Democratic establishment have been sucking up to China for donkey's years. And, you know, Joe China, remember, that's the point that we keep coming back to because it's incredibly important for the future of this country and the choice in November. All right, coming up, coronavirus is serious enough without the media stirring up fear and panic with their apocalyptic spin. One liberal talk show host finally called them out for it. We'll show you who after the break. Welcome back. We all know how serious coronavirus is, so we could do without the ridiculous fear-mongering from media outlets that sensationalize every piece of coronavirus-related news. Bill Maher, of all people, he highlighted this trend on his show on Friday. Take a look.
Last month, the Washington Post ran the headline, "It feels like a war zone," with this picture. This is not a war zone. This is a man with a box of eggs. And I've never seen a war zone with this much bacon.
He ended that monologue with this. "We need the news to calm down and treat us like adults. Trump calls you fake news. Don't make him be right." I thought that was great. Matt, I don't know if you saw the whole thing, but it was just a really good, very forensic look at some of the ways in which these headlines are just so hysterical these days. As I said, it's bad enough without making it sound even worse than it is.
Well, I will give you the most vile example of media hatred from just hours ago. Fabiola Santiago, a columnist with the Miami Herald, tweeted essentially that it would work out nicely if crowded Florida beaches resulted in the death of Trump and DeSantis supporters because that could result in more political power for the Democrats. And will she lose her job at the Miami Herald for that? Of course she won't, because the media has been feeding into the hate and hysteria with equal portions. My governor, Ron DeSantis, has taken a lot of incoming from the national media, but when you look at the science and the facts, Dr. Birx today said that the state of Florida has one of the most sophisticated contact tracing systems so that we're able to use science and innovation and data instead of the most draconian procedures to shut down the economy and zap the will of our fellow Americans.
That's really interesting. I can't believe it. Miami Herald, did you say? That's amazing.
Yes.
Unbelievable. I mean, look, Sara, we're told we mustn't be partisan, and of course it's a big national emergency, but the media, I don't think they treat it like that. I think their subconscious and sometimes very explicit bias, which is to sort of paint Trump as this villain, whatever happens, is leading them to make these frightening statements to people that exaggerate and terrify with the language they use. It's so irresponsible.
It's absolutely irresponsible. It's like screaming fire in a theater, you know, and there might be just some smoke outside. I mean, and not having all the facts. I mean, we shouldn't downplay that people have really been affected and their lives have been changed and people have lost their lives because of coronavirus. But because of the way the media has been treating this, we can't separate the fear from the absolute fact. And the media is supposed to be delivering the facts to the American people and to our legislators so we can make the best decisions moving forward, just like Matt said. And unfortunately, the media is not doing that. They're focused on President Trump 24/7 and trying to target him in this administration. And unfortunately, that just backfires, and it backfires in a really bad way. And the United States really needs to move forward and find solutions, not live in fear and panic.
Exactly. And Tammy, there's another terrible example today. Matt reminded me of what I'd been looking at today. There was a column I saw in the New York Times. Tom Friedman, the great guru of the globalist elite, he had an analogy, and it was in the headline, of that Trump's reopening plan is inviting Americans to play Russian roulette with their lives. They're just so over the top and ridiculous.
Well, it is, but it also, it's abusive. of individuals who in the regular news of what the reality is stressful enough. But remember, in the beginning, the same news media was getting excited, viscerally excited at saying this was going to be Trump's Katrina. So they pictured it from the beginning as a political opportunity, one that they could associate, of course, with harming a Republican president. They didn't see it as, well, another disaster for America, a natural or man-made disaster. It was, oh, how can we use this to get what we want politically? This is how absolutely depraved and ghoulish the media has been. The bit of anti-Trump that is still out there that can't see past any of that in order to think of the American people or this nation. So remember, that was the core of their initial response. This was Trump's Katrina, once again underestimating him, underestimating the people who think of this country first and of her people first, and mostly underestimating the American people. And it is the craven, ghoulish point of view, and it's one that they've held for obviously at least a generation now.
And it's actually so clear when you put it like that, the alliance between the media, and as we were discussing earlier, the Democrats, that's exactly how Nancy Pelosi is handling it, as we discussed earlier. All right, coming up, the Democrats touted the 10th Amendment in their latest attempt to vilify the president, but have they actually read the 10th Amendment? I have, I actually know it by heart, and I don't think they'll like what it says. The details after the break. Welcome back. The left's outrage mob worked themselves into hysterics this week when the president said that he'd be the one who decides when to open our states back up. Of course, he went on to say that his decision would be made in conjunction with the state's governors, but the left didn't let that inconvenient fact get in the way of their narrative. He's proclaimed himself a king, they cried out. What about the 10th Amendment? It's obvious that these Democrats haven't even read the 10th Amendment. If they did, they'd realize that they'd have to throw away about half their platform. Here's what the 10th Amendment actually says. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Take note, Biden, Cuomo, and the rest of you virtue-signaling Trump-hating elitists. This means there's no role for the federal government in healthcare, education, or housing, just to name a few. So say goodbye to your plans to expand Obamacare, your plans to give everyone free college, and your plans to make banks give out risky mortgages. You use taxpayer dollars to expand the federal government in 100 different ways every day. Now you're the ones lecturing us about the 10th Amendment. Give me a break. The American people see right through you. We here on this show, on the other hand, truly believe in decentralizing power, and we're planning a big campaign on it, so stay tuned for that. All right, coming up, Tammy, Sara, and Matt Gaetz will be back to react. Don't go away. Welcome back. So let's talk about the 10th Amendment and the Democrats' obviously ignorant, insincere, incoherent embrace of it just to attack President Trump. Matt, I mean, look, they are so inconsistent on this. You know, earlier on they were screaming at the president to nationalize the response, and now when he tries to do that, they said, "Oh, you can't do that. It's the 10th Amendment." I mean, it's just laughable, isn't it?
Yeah, the president's consistently in favor of states executing complex issues, from coronavirus to even our health care bill, where he tried to get block grants to the states. The American economy was like a roaring bonfire. And, you know, the coronavirus snuffed it down to an ember. We've got to nurture that ember. We've got to blow a little oxygen into it. And then you layer on the tinder in phases. That's why the president's multi-phase approach empowers the states while giving them the federal support they need to accomplish the stated objectives.
I mean, this whole debate, Tammy, it made me think of a point that you made a while back that really kind of made an impression on me. We're talking about the populism of the right and populism of the left and Bernie Sanders and so on. And you said you can't be a populist on the left because you basically don't believe in people power, in decentralizing power. It's all about centralization. And that's what the left believes. So the idea that they're suddenly in favor of the 10th Amendment is just a joke.
Well, it's out of convenience, obviously. But look, you can look at it this way, that Donald Trump is so powerful, he even got the Democrats to believe in federalism, even if it was for 5 minutes. But at this point also, Cuomo was saying, you know, he was the first one saying, you can't tell us what to do, and we're going to do it on ourselves. It's the 10th Amendment. And the next thing you know, he's been complaining over the last couple of days of Please, we can't do it without federal money for testing. That is because the budgets for California and New York have been a disaster, and they want to hide that fact. So it eventually comes out, and at one point they say, Daddy, you can't tell us what to do, and then, Daddy, please help us. Really, federalism, the power of the states, is the only way for people to be truly free, and I think the American people are recognizing that at this point.
Exactly. I mean, it's actually really, really pointing to, one of the fundamental founding strengths of this country, the fact that you do have this decentralized idea built into the very foundation of the country through the Constitution. Sara, I mean, the Democrats don't really understand that and don't believe in it either.
No, they don't. And I thought Tammy brought up a really great point as far as budgets. I mean, before coronavirus, these states were already suffering. They had terrible budgets, and they were already suffering in education and healthcare and other areas. So this is about being prepared. And I think what the states have learned because of coronavirus, because we're dealing with such a crisis right now, is that the states need to be prepared. They need to be ready to face things that they never expected to face before. And I think that is the lesson learned here. And I think the president did a phenomenal job of saying, look, the federal government's here, we'll help you out, but this is a state issue and we want to be here to support you, but this is up to the states, and the states need to be ready, whether it's ventilators, whether it's their budgets, whether it's other systems and other unexplained or unsuspecting issues or crises that come into the future. The states need to be ready, and that's what the 10th Amendment is about. It's about individual rights, it's about the states' rights, and then the federal government assisting. We'll just have to remind them in November.
Exactly. All right. Well, as you all know, we like to try and end this show in a happy way when we can, and we need to keep our spirits high during these tough times. So, while it may be a while before you can go to a stand-up comedy show again, we've got the next best thing right here, the Joe Biden comedy segment after the break. All right, so we had more comedy gold from Joe Biden this week. They've started actually putting his wife, Jill, out there with him in case you keep an eye on him as things go off the rails, which they nearly always do. Take a look at this.
We gotta, it's just, but you gotta, I mean, we gotta reassure, look, here, my message to everybody I talk to is we're gonna get through this.
I don't know if he's going to get through that interview. All right, now watch this one. This was CNN. And actually, the brilliant thing about this is just watch the faces of Anderson Cooper and Dr. Sanjay Gupta during this moment from Joe Biden.
The kinds of things that have to be done. You know, there's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that, was totally different than it's called, he called it the World War II, he had the War Production Board.
Oh my God, it's so bad. Oh, The Thing. Do you remember that one about, The Thing is another version of that. All right, I don't know. I mean, we do this, Tammy, I don't know what, there's nothing new to say, but it's just so entertaining.
Yes, and I end up turning into like a German Shepherd who hears a weird sound because my head just keeps turning and it gets to be very awkward. All I can say is I can't wait for the debates. Let me just leave it there.
Oh, I totally agree. Sara?
I don't know. I think I can wait for the debate. This is just really tragic. I mean, I want to laugh, but I don't, because I really feel there's something going on here, and people need to start asking questions. I mean, real legitimate questions about what's happening with Joe Biden, with the former vice president, and it's very concerning. And I don't know if the American public fully understands what's going on here, if they're even aware of this, because CNN, MSNBC, all the other local channels aren't really putting it out there.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, it is a serious point, but as I keep saying, he's the one that's putting himself forward, that, he can do this, the biggest job in the world, and he's kind of competent to do that. So I think, let's take him at his word. They keep saying there's nothing wrong with him, so fine. Let's just laugh at him, because it's so ridiculous. And it's week after week, never ends.
Dr. Jill Biden is a brilliant woman, though she may have to hone her ventriloquism skills so that when the Biden puppet breaks, she's able to step in and offer meaningful commentary. You know, talk about foolish. Biden and the Democrats told us for years that Russia was the greatest geopolitical threat we had. This election is going to be about who is competent to confront China, and on trade, on national security, on global transparency. Donald Trump is the person our country can trust to get the best deal and the best answers out of China moving forward.
I totally agree with that. Let's just sort of, underline that point, Tammy. Just a quick final thought from you on that China point, because it's going to be such a big issue. And actually this moment, I mean, just very quickly, you've got all these issues that Trump's been on about for so long, all coming together in his favor in this election. Trade, China, the lot, manufacturing.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. The Democrats are trying to make it seem as though Donald Trump didn't know what he was doing. But the fact of the matter is all the facts point to the prescient nature of his decision-making leading up to this. That's what we're going to see through the summer and into the fall.
Exactly. All right. Well, there you are. Thank you all. It was a great show. Nice to see you. See you all next Sunday when the next revolution will be televised.